Chapter 2, The Murder. On November 30th, 1977, 20-year-old white Terry Lee Farmer walked up to Wayman Small, a snitch, in front of 60 witnesses working in the prison's tag plant. He looked square into the eyes of this notorious and vicious black inmate and impaled his heart with the shank. Small died as he attempted to take his next breath. Throughout the 5 trials of the Small murder, Farmer steadfastly stood by the gang's story. He had killed Small in self-defense over a bulldogging incident. He claimed Small had tried to turn him into his boy toy, but he had refused. Before writing this story, I had only seen Farmer once in person, when I called him as a witness at the 5th trial of his co-conspirators. At that time, all I or any of the other defense attorneys needed to know was the content of a convicted witness's proposed testimony. Nothing else mattered. But to unravel how the Florence 11 evaded justice, I now needed to know why this callow youngster, all the while facing the death penalty himself, first volunteered the murder rap, then steadfastly insisted his co-conspirators were uninvolved, taking the case himself, especially since he could have easily have turned state witness and spent the rest of his life term on Easy Street. I learned about Farmer's pitiful infancy from a letter in the court file. His foster mother had written the sentencing judge after Farmer's conviction for murdering Small, a conviction later overturned and then superseded by a plea bargain. She wrote to Judge Platt in hopes that perhaps it will help to have a better understanding of the behavior pattern of Terry Farmer. Miss Rita Grace Scott explained that as an 18-month-old, Farmer was found abandoned, along with his 9-month-old sister. Farmer's father was in jail, and the mother had left the children unattended for several days in a locked upstairs apartment in Jacksonville, Florida in September of 1957. Hearing their cries, a neighbor climbed a porch to reach the 2nd story and left diluted milk for the 2 children. When retrieved by juvenile authorities, Farmer was malnourished and underdeveloped. One eye was damaged. His feces, covered buttocks, had bleeding sores. For weeks afterward, his skin peeled with each diaper change and he screamed in pain. The Scotts cared for the boy as his foster parents until he was adopted by the Farmers. He didn't walk until age 3. I learned about the crimes that sent Terry Lee Farmer to Arizona State Prison for life from Farmer himself and the detective who put him behind bars, Randy Pollson. Pollson's persistent pursuit of a missing person report sent Farmer to prison before his 20th birthday. Detective Pollson and I met over coffee and dinner one night in downtown Phoenix in 1997 at an all-night Denny's off Interstate 17 at 23rd Avenue and Thomas. Pollson was working narcotics for the Department of Public Safety and would have to leave on a moment's notice if one of his snitches paged him during dinner. In early September 1976, during his 3rd year of police work and filled with youthful vigor, Pollson sat at his desk in the Cocosino County Sheriff's Department in Flagstaff, Arizona, mulling over a commonplace missing persons report concerning Kathleen Herman and Tilfred Oso. Pollson had rapidly advanced from uniformed patrol deputy to detective in the sheriff's office. Though younger and more handsome, Pollson bears a striking resemblance to a prominent Arizona politician who would play a part in this tale, Bruce Babbitt, Arizona's Attorney General at the time of Wayman Small's murder and shortly thereafter as governor and then President Clinton's Secretary of the Interior. Both Pollson and Babbitt grew up in rural northern Arizona. Intellectual, intuitive, and articulate, Pollson developed a clear, well-defined sense that the world is divided into good and evil, right and wrong. Over the Labor Day weekend of 1976, Herman and Oso had been reported missing by their co-workers at Paul Harvey Concessions inside Grand Canyon National Park, 80 vacant miles north of Flagstaff, the county seat of vast Cocosino County, the 2nd largest county in the lower 48 states. Pollson learned that 19-year-old Kathleen Herman, an average-sized brunette from Erie, Pennsylvania, had been hired by the park concessionary just 2 weeks earlier. Tilfred Oso, a Navajo Indian, was a 24-year-old native of Winslow, Arizona, with a large extended family. He also worked for Paul Harvey. Herman had hooked up with Oso at a park employee hangout the night before, and they decided to hitchhike to Flagstaff. Herman planned to purchase a small refrigerator for her apartment. Also was headed to nearby Winslow for a few belongings to finish his apartment. Both had uncollected paychecks and left behind their clothing and belongings. Their friends did not believe that they had just run off together, abandoning new jobs and all their possessions. With no leads of any kind, Pollson turned to publicity, calling radio, television, and newspaper reporters in Flagstaff and the distant metropolis of Phoenix, asking for information about the pair's disappearance. Numerous potential sightings were reported before a truly promising lead materialized 2 weeks later. Pollson, Randy answered tersely as he picked up the phone in his small cubbyhole at the sheriff's office. "I think I saw those 2 kids get picked up," the caller began, explaining that he worked in Phoenix and had noticed a short news account about the missing hitchhikers. "I took my wife and kids to the Grand Canyon over the Labor Day weekend. It was raining when we left, and we saw 2 kids, a white girl and an Indian guy, hitchhiking at the entrance of the park. We thought about picking them up, but our car was crowded. As I drove by, I saw a car stop to pick them up. I told my wife, 'Good, someone got those kids out of the rain,' so we kept driving. About 10 minutes later, the same car passed me, going real fast. I remembered it because the driver and the passenger were wearing the same hats. Perfectly round, flat-brimmed, brown leather, goofy looking, the kind you see at carnivals and fairs. Not a cowboy style at all. The car was a green and white Monte Carlo with Texas plates. Pollson asked the man's name and job. 'I work as a truck driver. I don't read the paper much and don't get to work early very often. I did today and was reading an old copy of the Arizona Republic with a story about missing hitchhikers near the Grand Canyon. I just knew I'd seen them as soon as I read the story, so I had to call you. Maybe it's nothing. Thanks a lot. Let me know if you think of anything else," said Pollson. Something about the story gave Pollson a sense of foreboding, a premonition. He'd been right. Something sinister had happened to the hitchhiking pair. Texas plates, green and white Monte Carlo. Not much of a lead, but better than nothing. On the off chance the driver of the Monte Carlo had brushed up against the law, Pollson meticulously combed through every police report in the past 4 months within 150 miles of Flagstaff that he could get his hands on. Highway Patrol accident reports along Interstate 40, routine patrol and arrest reports from the city of Flagstaff and Williams, Sheriff's Office and FBI reports. He was looking for one thing, a Monte Carlo with Texas plates. The search yielded a surprisingly long list, so Pollson hit the teletype wires and phones to narrow the field, calling the Texas County Sheriff, where each Monte Carlo was registered, asking for the vehicle's color. 2 more weeks passed. Answers came in, but none reported a green and white Monte Carlo in their jurisdiction. Following up on a non-responding department, Pollson called the Leon County Sheriff's Office to speak to the Detective Bureau. Detective Randy Pollson, Cocosino County Sheriff's Office, Flagstaff, Arizona here. I'm working a missing persons case and I need help identifying a Chevrolet Monte Carlo that might be registered to someone who lives in your county. Did you get my teletype? Funny you should call, the Texas detective answered. A guy and a gal just came into my office today and dumped a plastic bag of junk on my desk. They wanted me to tell them what to do with the items. They found the stuff inside a car they'd retrieved from Nevada that belonged to their brother, Kelly Paul Bryan, a 24-year-old insurance salesman. The car is a green and white Monte Carlo. They got a call from the Boulder City, Nevada Police Department telling them that the car was there. It had been abandoned after a high-speed chase, but the occupants got away. Until they got the call about the Monte Carlo in Nevada, they thought their brother was on a business trip. They don't know how the car got to Nevada. None of the stuff belongs to their brother. They're quite mystified. What's in the bag? Pollson asked. Not much. Some papers with names and phone numbers, clothes, and a hat. Brown leather, flat, round brim. The people say the Boulder City PD found another hat just like this one at the scene where the car was abandoned. That's the car, Pollson screamed out, no longer restraining his excitement at the miraculous find. There's more, the investigator continued. Turns out Brian never showed up for work. To top it off, a body was found out in the weeds at a roadside rest along I-35 in Texas, and the family identified it as Brian. Murder, shot in the head and his skull smashed with rocks. His pulse racing, Pollson asked, "Could you send me a license photo of the victim? I need it in my own investigation." The driver and passenger of the green and white Monte Carlo may have killed Herman and Oso between Flagstaff and Boulder City, Pollson surmised. That didn't narrow it down much. Hundreds of miles of lonely highways, barren deserts, obscure washes and canyons, windswept mesas, and sagebrush prairies festoon the remote emptiness of northwest Arizona along the route to Hoover Dam, where Arizona ends and Nevada begins at Lake Mead. Pollson looked back through his list. What had brought this Monte Carlo to the attention of local law enforcement? The report mentioning its license plate was inconsequential and yielded no leads on the identity of the driver or passenger. Late one August night, while checking for stolen vehicles, a Flagstaff patrol officer had written down a list of license plates on cars parked outside of one of the long string of hotels on Old Highway 66 through town. The Monte Carlo hadn't shown up stolen that night, but the patrolman's notes proved its presence in Flagstaff. The missing persons case took a backseat in Pollson's pile of assignments. He had no other leads to follow, no clear plan. Cops are a social bunch. In spite of what their work reveals, they generally like people. The image of lazy cops, their patrol cars parked for long hours outside Denny's and the local Winchell's donut shop, fits into a stereotype, a popular mythology, an accepted prejudice about the men in blue. The cops see it another way. During coffee breaks over donuts, stories are shared, odd incidents are mulled over, connections are made. The bad guys get identified, crimes get solved. It was just so for Pollson. "I've got this odd missing persons case. It bothers me," Pollson told his cop buddies one day at Denny's. He related the tale of the hitchhikers picked up by two men driving a fast Monte Carlo with Texas plates. "Randy, I got something you might want to check out," offered an FBI agent stationed in Flagstaff. A pair of guys burglarizing national monuments along Interstate 40 sounds like the class of characters you're looking for. They got caught, but only after a high-speed chase and a running shootout with New Mexico Highway Patrol. Geography told Pollson his hunch was illogical. To get from Boulder City to Petrified Forest National Monument, site of one of the burglaries, the pair would have to return through Flagstaff. Would they really be so brazen? Nonetheless, an undeniable pulse told Pollson to check it out. "I'd like to read the report," Pollson found himself saying. At the FBI office, the agent showed the incident report to Pollson. During an interview, one of the pair from the Petrified Forest incident, a man named Larry Hartley, admitted being arrested in Lawton, Oklahoma, along with a man he called Ray, on charges of possession of a stolen vehicle. Pollson wanted to talk with Hartley, but first he contacted the FBI in Oklahoma to request mugshots of Hartley and Ray, his cohort from the Oklahoma arrest. Armed with 3 photographs of Hartley, Ray, and the murdered owner of the Texas Monte Carlo, Pollson decided to follow up on the names and phone numbers found in the abandoned Monte Carlo. One number had Flagstaff's prefix of 774 and the name Cookie. Pollson called the number, then drove to a motel where Interstate 17 from Phoenix merged into Milton Street in South Flagstaff. 20-year-old Cookie Orozco had agreed to meet him at her parents' motel to discuss her relationship with the suspects. "I met him in the bar," she told Pollson, pointing to the photographs of Hartley and Ray. "We shot some pool and drank some beers. They called each other Will and Ray. They wanted me to take a drive with them to the Grand Canyon, but I didn't want to go." She had nothing more to add. Pollson waved to Cookie as he left the lobby and headed on to his next stop, Roswell, New Mexico, an 11-hour drive east across sagebrush deserts, Red Rock Canyons, the Navajo Reservation, and vast empty spaces dotted with gaudy sights, Chief Yellowhair's trading post, a tourist trap filled with cheap Indian trinkets and Mexican saddle blankets, and highway signs tantalizing passerbys with the slogan, "Winslow for men." He drove Interstate 40 for 380 miles to Albuquerque, then headed south on US Highway 285 for another 140 miles. Pollson drove fast, hoping Hartley hadn't posted bond yet on the charges from the Petrified Forest incident. The Cocosino County Sheriff's Department could never afford to assign 2 detectives to an investigation, and certainly wouldn't do so for a missing person investigation requiring so much time and promising so little prospect of success. Pollson began to devise a plan. How would he confront Hartley? How would he build up from the burglaries, the car chases, and the shootout before springing the questions he really wanted to ask about the disappearance of Herman and also? When Pollson finally arrived in Roswell, he wasted no time. "I'm Detective Pollson, Cocosino County Sheriff's Office, Flagstaff, Arizona. I'd like to talk to you, Randy," told Hartley. The cocky youth slouched into his chair in the interview room, twitching his nose and cocking his head back as he sized up his inquisitor. He had a handsome face, shoulder-length hair, and a Fu Manchu mustache. At first, he did not appear sinister or threatening, just arrogant and cocky. As quickly as his first impression sank in, Pollson sensed a second, ghastly undercurrent that drew him up, short as he had felt his muscles tighten. The numbing drive had not prepared Pollson for what now struck him most, Hartley's eyes. "Sure, what about?" the 24-year-old Hartley answered. His outward appearance was friendly, but his eyes flashed, revealing a fire burning inside, a diseased mind, a fire hot enough to sear flesh. His eyes laughed back at Pollson, but they failed to hide the hateful, cunning mind driving his actions. Behind those eyes dwelt a demonic persona that resided in a world utterly detached from the placid and deceitful words that flowed mechanically and unconventionally from his mouth. Hartley admitted being in Flagstaff, meeting Cookie, and traveling with Ray. He admitted the theft of the Monte Carlo, but didn't mention what had become of its owner. He denied going to the Grand Canyon and picking up 2 hitchhikers. The lies were unimportant. Pollson only wanted Hartley's story. He'd pick it apart later. After he caught up with Ray and got his story, it wouldn't match Hartley's. This he knew for certain. An hour and a half of Hartley's fabrications gave Pollson enough material to punch full of holes. In spite of himself, Hartley had done Pollson one huge favor. Hartley said he first met Ray when he worked in Oklahoma as a carnival roustabout. He talked about road dogging with Ray and admitted to many less serious crimes they had committed. During those travels, Hartley said that Ray had used a half-dozen aliases: Ralph Mark, James Sterling, James Farmer, but the actual person behind each alias was Terry Lee Farmer. "I know you're lying to me," Pollson growled, cutting off Hartley as he stood up. "You killed Kathleen and Tilfred. I'll prove it, and I'll see you get the gas chamber." "Yeah, sure you will," were the last words Pollson heard from Hartley, who acted amused.